There are many stories to how life originated in the whole universe, and people have a lot of them in different forms and gods, and this is one of those stories. Back in a time before time, way back, 14 billion years ago, when the universe became lit for the first time through what we call something like a Big Bang, that set forth a ignition to creating all matter that we know of today inside of a fiery furnace, and chain reactions began. As this coalesced into popcorn kernels, each one of these sparks you see turning into their own furnace and exploding out further as a lit for stars to be born and for life to actually begin because of all the elements that can be created inside them. One master race inside of each galaxy gets elected in some way to become the primordial keeper of that galaxy. Intergalactic travel is something that is far-fetched and takes a creature that is beyond what we normally conceptualize. So we'll call these people the Zodani, and they happened, well, look at things in a timeline. We've been around for about 4.2 billion years as a planet, not as a people, but as a planet, but yet there's strong evidence that the universe as we know it, and we can't see the end of it at this point, is 14.6 billion years old. And so if you can imagine in our area here that we've happened in 4 billion years, then if you have something that's 3 times that long, you can imagine at what level those people would be. It's far surpassing anything like Star Trek and Star Wars. And indeed, Star Wars is a story about a people that were advanced a long time ago and went far, far away. Well, these Zodani go around with something as primitive and concept to their advancement as a Genesis probe from Star Trek, where they shot it onto a planet that was just extremely eligible but didn't have higher form life on it, and they shot life onto it. Now in the series they act like it's a big ordeal, and should they not, and all these type thing. I would tell you that the Zodani would do this as a ceremonial thing, that it would be their edict is to spread life throughout the universe and what can happen on each planet and how each one can form and the things that could happen. And there's a major thread of DNA that goes with this that all has coded in writing, so you're going to get variations on a theme of a similar type creature, similar type plant, similar type, not the same. I mean, truthfully, we have such a variation inside of our own planet ourselves. You can imagine that there's a myriad of different things, but it would be odd as hell. But you could go to 100 different stars and eventually you'd find one that had a fern on it, looked just exactly like the ferns in our primordial world that we still have today. So these Zodani go around and do something like sling a couple of buckets of swill into our ocean and come back millions of years later checking on it. They perhaps even just send probes that come by and monitor and see what's going on. And of course they can scan the planet very easily, and in that they can tell what's going on. And they could hang out up until here recently just hanging around other stars and things like that. So you could have a people that goes around and does this and sets forth life. Now, life also will happen elsewhere in the galaxy as their first ones that actually come up, like the first popcorn shells that ever pop up. And it's true that maybe like Carl Sagan thought, and a lot of people, that as they travel around the galaxy, they can monitor radio waves and things. And once they get our signals, they can tell what level that you're at. And then they send a probe, they monitor it. And once they get to a certain point, then they show up. Just like we've always thought in all the movies and so on. And it takes you to a different level. You get accepted in, right? So that's basically a breakdown of how it runs. And so you would have somebody like the Anunnaki gods who would be a secondary, and they would answer to the major gods of the galaxy who answer to the Zodani. And the Zodani would be in a council probably with other galaxies that are close, and everything's primordial controlled. And so maybe you could look at this conceptualized like our technology is like Tatooine, except for all of a sudden aliens show up, and so there's spaceships, but it seems kind of primordial. Then you have the people that are like on the ships and so on, and the different planets you see, and they definitely have a lot more technology going on, and it's another step above what's going on in a lot of those other places. Then you have things like Death Stars going on and stuff of that concept. People are doing jumping light speeds and things like that. Now, Star Wars has got a big mix of that going on all at once. Star Trek does break it down apart a lot more than that. So I guess you could see how it would seed the universe with itself and its own technology too at the same time. But if we look at it in a nutshell, that's kind of the way that it goes, and I can't break it down any easier. Now let's look at this in reverse. From us now, we know about the God of the Hebrew Bible and things, and now we know that he's only a few thousand years old, of the beginnings of his own primordial thing. But then that's attached to ancient stuff that all goes back to Sumerian things and goes back to 5, 6, 7,000 years ago easy, and tells of the flood and stories and on and certain gods that do things, and Saturn and the gods like they're in the Bible, who is El. And so you have this worshiping of stars that's going on, and planets. Now the planets that move through the sky at night are wandering stars, as they used to call them, right? And these wandering stars, is what we know as planets, are right close to us. But if you go back a little bit before that, most everybody, except for the Sumerians, thought that there was a giant bubble or globe around us, that we were merely inside of some type of a bubble, trapped inside of, on a flat earth too. If you look up the Bible Earth model, it'll kind of show you we're inside of a snow globe. That's what I wanted to say. And this snow globe effect that we're in, the surface of what is the firmament that held up the water above and the waters below, the water above would be space. And so they literally thought that the Milky Way galaxy itself was just a band through there. And, they looked at constellations, they gave names to them, and as they watched them through the progression that they have through the night skies, through the seasons, they started to develop a sense of the seasons. And of course they knew what a day and a night was, but once they developed a sense of that, then they started to break it down. And on the walls there are simple outlines of perhaps where a post is out, and it casts inside of a cave or against a wall a simple shadow, and that simple shadow has a dot on it, and as it goes through time, that dot rises and rises and rises and lowers and lowers and lowers, and this is the sun making that shadow happen at its maximum and minimums and figuring out seasons and things. if you go back far enough, people used to worship birds because they're magical, and indeed the power of flight is magic. We've harnessed it now today, but back in the day, it was something that was magical, how somebody could just fly. And so birds who used to pick on the bodies, like vultures and things, would be seen flying way up into the sky, almost out of sight. And they didn't know how high the dome was up there. They just knew it went above the clouds, and then that just kind of, it's up there, isn't it? And in fact, heaven was seen as a city in the clouds and things like that. So they would go and the birds would take the body to heaven. Okay, and so you have all this symbolism with that, and Horus, and all these different things, and the Anzu bird, and the creatures from heaven, and the stories from the Sumerians, and so on, that have to do with that. Now, their primordial gods are said to have come from the stars, and indeed, they're the first people we can probably find that actually attached the wandering stars' names to gods to deify them, right? And you have Anu, and Enlil, and Enki, and Ningishita, and Ninurta, who is Saturn, and all these different primordial gods that they have. And it signifies the specialty of 5 and 7. 5 is, even though Sumerians counted off 6s and 10s and 60, that 5 and 7 are significant because in the sky you can only see 7 entities. You see the sun and moon, and then you see the 5 wandering stars, and that gives you 7. And if you take the 2 entities that are right there at you, the sun and moon, then you have 5. So this gives you the significance of it, right? And the idea of there being something below and something nice, and no one knew what was on the other side, that people in Egypt started deifying and putting their people inside of graves, and it was a land of the dead. That this idea and concept that they did, that the Sumerians did too with Dilmun, where they buried a lot of their dead, became a concept of being the underworld, which is the bottom half below the equator. So they had figured out where the equator is, and the upper half. And when you get into the bottom half, you're getting away from your constellations and starting to get towards other ones, and so on. And there's no coming back from the land of the dead, and all these things come out of these ideas that get extrapolated over time, and then hearsay from one to another, and it becomes quite distorted over time. But then the concept seems to still be there, and you can still find that same kernel of an idea. Now, the oddity here is that we do know that there's Arata, and there's Göbekli Tepe. Now, Tepe goes back to about 10,500 years ago, and Arata goes back to about 22,000 years ago. They have writings, and those writings speak of An and Anu and Enki, or not Enki, but Enlil and Inanna. And so Inanna has always been known as it's Venus or Diana, and so she is also the goddess of hunting, and Artemis. And so this conceptual thing is taken all the way through, and Greeks and other people have this same idea. In fact, some of these flash concepts are taken all the way around the planet to people that had no recollection of ever being a part of each other from a long, long, long time ago. But what happens if you go back far enough? Then we turn into a caveman, and we're unaware people. We're not alert. We're pretty much primitives. We're way before Stone Age and any lithic things. And back then, people used to worship planets, moving stars, galaxies. They with their mind, finally being able to make pictures, or able to connect dots, like just on connect the dots that you do when you're a kid, and make pictures out of the constellations. Those pictures watching them spin through the heavens and people monitoring them for wisdom and knowledge. The shamans and the wise men and priests of ancient old monitored these things and came up with secret knowledge. And literally, this secret knowledge was the secret knowledge of the entire world that we know of here up until through the Dark Ages. And then as science peeled and revealed all this to it, it became to take on some type of mystic idea and concept, and then some reflective idea that all really is based on ancestor worship and the reflection of how and where we came from, where we are, and how we do seem to lose it way back when. And that would have been because of a flood. Well, there's localized floods that happen, but maybe perhaps not a giant one that happens, except for around 10,500 BC. That seems to be a large cometary fragmented strike, multiple across the planet, a lot into North America, and it released the continental ice shelf at one time and caused chaos and tsunamis and things that in some areas reached 400-foot waves, crashing in and so on. So it was a devastating time. And then, of course, if people don't have a way to record it, to recall it, to do things, after a short period of time, you'll come up with a different concept of things. But the Sumerians, out of nowhere, seem to have come up with the wheel. And the first wheel has an axle, another wheel hooked up to a cart, and it's ready to hook up to a beast that they've already domesticated, a beast of burden. And so we have this instant agriculture, irrigation, and things. But we do find errata that wasn't doing that, but they were perfecting and hybridizing some of the earliest grains and things. There are pictures on the walls of them with horses and riding them that was not in Sumeria in any way, shape, or form. They had donkeys and things, and all the way through into Canaan lands and stuff, they had donkeys until the people of the north and the Hyksos came down, the equestrians of the north, and became half of Egypt and were co-rulers of Egypt. They indeed brought the horses and the chariots there. In fact, the animals from Sumer and the upper Eurasian area that were already being domesticated were the ones that were brought down into Egypt and turned them from a hunter-gathering people into a true farming and culture that was unable to let them flourish in the first place. The same thing happened to Sumeria, but it wasn't able to hold on to itself for so many dynasties before it fell to the Akkadians, and then never really became the Sumerians again, but kind of almost a mock culture as the Sumerians broke apart and went all over the place. And some of those places were back over into the Levant area and up around and through into Europe. So anyhow, there's one of the interesting stories, I guess, that people have deduced out of some ancient writings and some folklore and tales that lead one to believe that that's the way that this pretty much has gone down, and that would be the story of humanity. Now, once we get past the level we're at now, and we're right on the cusp of it, at the dawning of the age of Aquarius, we should be, by prophecy, reaching a new level of humanity and mankind. And indeed, you can see as we end up unbabylizing the world of chaos back where we all speak a common language and come together, this little blue planet of ours that we have is becoming an incredible place of knowledge. And in just the last few hundred years, we've turned from simplistic carts that apparently were around in Sumer, boom, like an explosion, and have become spacefarers ourselves. We've harnessed and turned into that bird and been able to fly, take over our planet, conquer. Have we conquered space? No, we haven't. And I thought by now, whenever I was a kid, that we would have, but we are getting somewhere, and we definitely need to get that somewhere going. And as we get to that next step, that next click in technology, I believe here shortly, someone's going to take notice again of us and show up. Everybody talks about UFOs, but I bet most of that can be explained, people, but some of it perhaps are being some type of monitoring. Something's going on like that. If you said 1 in a million of those stories had some type of account of actuary, there's still thousands of stories like that. So things that can't be explained. They've even come up with a mathematical problem. The problem is that if they gave themselves the least possible probability of life forming on planets, but then look at the number of stars that have planets like our own with possible life on them, and that life would develop better, right? It used to be an extremely far-fetched number to the certain power. Now we know how many galaxies are out there by simplistic things like the Deep Field Hubble Space Telescope field that showed thousands of galaxies in a place that we didn't even think anything existed, almost a dead zone. When you start adding up the thousands and millions of options that comes there, if you took that and you said, oh yeah, well, divide that by 1 billion, because I don't think it really could ever happen, we'd still have billions of planets in our universe that are just exactly like us, that have created technology and life that are as advanced as us, somewhere far, far away, far out there, somewhere the Zodani know of, as well as they probably are aware of anybody that gets to any certain level out of any of these galaxies. And then they have monitors that bring it to the next level. Anyhow, guys, that's one take on it, one story, one example of way it could go down. Some people think that that's a lot more likely than some of the ideas that we have now that seem somewhat archaic once we have the science in front of us. Then again, there's a creator of all in all of these stories. Like, share, and subscribe. Peace.